Howdy folks, welcome back to another episode of Mingles with Jingles, episode, I don't know, 60 something. We'll find out when I upload and I'll put the title on it. New intro by the way, hope you noticed. I really hope you noticed, otherwise all my work was for nothing. I got bored. I was sitting down to record this episode of Mingles with Jingles and I thought, you know what, I want a new intro. So I spent 10 minutes knocking that together. Hope you like it. People are always asking, of course, what's the music from Jingles? It's from the Steven Spielberg movie 1941. It's the main theme for the movie. Written and conducted by John Williams and performed by the Boston Pops Philharmonic Orchestra. So there you go. Not that it's going to stop people from asking, what's that music at the beginning of Mingles with Jingles? Because, you know, that's just not how the internet works. But hey, I tried. Speaking of that's just not how the internet works, that video that I put up a couple of days ago, you know the one I mean, the War Thunder one, with me being an arsehole. You didn't like that one, did you? Well, I suppose I should have seen it coming, and let's face it, I did see it coming. There are enough people out there prepared to give me crap whenever I'm not being an arsehole, that when I put a video up where I am deliberately being an arsehole, it really comes as no surprise whatsoever. But And I accept that. I absolutely 100% accept that. For those of you who are sitting scratching your heads thinking, what the hell are you talking about, Jingles? I basically put a War Thunder video up where I trolled a guy into chasing me 20 kilometres away from all the rest of the action in a realistic battle in War Thunder. And then just as he got to within shooting range, I bailed out on him because I thought it was funny. And it was a dick move. I absolutely 100% accept that it was a dick move. But what surprised me about the comments and the response to the video... Well, first of all, I did screw up in that video. Earlier on in the engagement, I was chasing another guy, and while my attention was diverted, he picked the exact right moment to evade me, and when I looked around again, he disappeared, and I assumed, completely wrongfully, that the guy had just bailed out on me when it looked like I was about to kill him. He absolutely didn't do that, but I didn't notice I got it wrong. And that pissed a lot of people off, and yep, I accept that one as well. But the main thrust of the video was the merry chase I led the guy who stuck on my tail from the furious dogfight in the middle of the map all the way to the edge of the map border, where I basically bailed out on him 20 kilometres away from where everything else was going on, and the guy was then too far away to influence the outcome of the battle, and by the time he made it back, he was the last one alive. And I thought it was hilarious, and I still do think it was hilarious, and a lot of you saw the funny side, but a lot of you didn't see the funny side, and that's absolutely fine. I knew when I put that video up that there were going to be lots and lots and lots of negative comments, but I did it anyway. But what absolutely amazed me about all of the negative comments, and there were a lot of negative comments. You know, I'd done something negative. I expected negative comments on the video. But the overwhelming majority of all of those negative comments were actually quite reasonable. People were saying things like, Jingles, that was a total dick move. Jingles, I expected better of you. Come on, Jingles, you're a better player than that. Jingles, you should have done this, and so on, and so on, and so on. But nobody was being really vicious about it. I mean, there were some angry comments, but there were very, very few direct personal attacks against me in the comments section of the video. And if ever I put a video up where I was expecting vicious, nasty, evil personal attacks against me, that video was it. I've put videos up where I've done absolutely nothing wrong. And some of the hate I get in the comments of the video is just, it's really, really vicious. But not in this one, which was just bizarre. I mean, I put a video up commemorating the death of Patty Andrews, who was one of the three Andrews sisters. They were three singers who, during the Second World War, went out and did a lot to support the troops. They would take troops out to dinner, you know, go on dates with them, do shows for the troops with Bob Hope. And she died. She was the last of the Andrews sisters, and I put a video up commemorating her life, you know, with some of her music. And I got hate in the comments of that video, far, far worse than in the video where I deliberately pull a dick move, and it just doesn't make any sense. Of course, the other side of the coin is what was not surprising about that video was the amount of people who whined and cried in the comments about me claiming that everybody was going after me just because I'm Jingles. Didn't say that. Didn't say that once. Feel free to point out the part in that video where I said everybody was going after me just because I'm some kind of YouTube superstar. Didn't say it. Didn't mean it. Doesn't stop people from accusing me of it, though, does it? So I guess what I'm saying here is thank you. Thank you to all the people who watched that video, didn't like what I did, said that they didn't like what I did, sometimes in quite forceful terms, but at the same time weren't dicks about it, even though they'd have been quite justified on this occasion in being complete dicks in the comments section of that video. Wow. Did not see that one coming. Well, anyway, moving on to current events. World of Tanks, patch 9.2 is out on the test server. The main focus of patch 9.2 is the whole stronghold mode, but there have been a couple of map changes as well. Now, I have not done a patch 9.2 test server video. I don't really have any plans to. There's not a massive amount of content in patch 9.2 that's going to affect most people, other than the changes to some of the maps. What I recommend you do is you check out Quickie Baby's YouTube channel, because he has done a patch 9.2 map update video. So if you are interested in what's happening in patch 9.2, don't really care about the whole stronghold mode thing, and you want to see what's new on, you know, the kind of changes that are actually going to affect you when 9.2 comes out, which is going to be the changes to the maps, then I recommend you check out Quickie Baby's patch 9.2 map update video. Link in the video description. In other news, and we're talking about War Thunder this time, thank you to Bullet for My Enemy, who sent me a PM letting me know that PlayStation 4 users are now playing on the same servers as everybody else in War Thunder. I had no idea. This one completely slipped under my radar. So thank you to Bullet for My Enemy for pointing this out. He also asked me to emphasise you can tell who the PS4 players are because they have an asterisk next to their name in the team list and over their aircraft when you see them flying. He also thought it was worth pointing out they're not ignoring you. If you're trying to talk to somebody who's flying using the PlayStation 4, they don't have keyboards plugged in. They cannot respond to anybody in chat. So they're not just being rude and ignorant and ignoring everybody's messages. They are physically incapable. Unless they have a keyboard plugged into their PlayStation 4, they cannot talk to you in chat other than using the chat commands. But PlayStation 4 players now playing on the same servers as everybody else in War Thunder. Next up we've got, well, it's not so much a question as a comment, and it's from L Extreme, and it's regarding light tanks, specifically light tanks, but it also applies to medium tanks somewhat, in World of Tanks and War Thunder. He, or she, it's difficult to tell, is a big fan of driving lights and mediums, especially in World of Tanks. However, you all know what it's like. Light tank drivers, you're kind of reliant on your team in World of Tanks to take advantage of the good spotting that you do in order to damage the enemy team. And actually, you know, light tank drivers who take their scouting seriously, it can be a frustrating job in World of Tanks. They do point out that there are some light tanks in World of Tanks, particularly we're talking the tier 7 and 8 light tanks, machines like the T-71, AMX-30, 90, tanks like that, that are dangerous tanks in their own right, particularly near the end of the game, when there are gaps in the defences that they can slip through and there are wounded tanks that they can savage and maul to death. But particularly for the lower tier light tanks, the kind of tanks they get into the kind of games where their only real effective purpose is as a scout, they are very, very reliant on their team's ability to take note, pay attention, and actually start shooting at the targets that they spot. And that is why L is a particular fan of the off-map artillery support system in War Thunder. You see, in War Thunder you cannot actually play as artillery, unlike in World of Tanks, but what they do have in War Thunder is light tanks and medium tanks have an ability which they can unlock, which allows them to call in artillery support fire, a barrage of artillery fire, which they target themselves. They don't have to rely on anybody else paying attention to where they're furiously pinging the map and lobbing a few shells in their direction. So this is a big equaliser in War Thunder. It means that even if you're driving a Panzer II, if you run into a KV-1, you're never going to penetrate him with your 20mm autocannon, but you can still call artillery fire in on him. So L's wondering whether or not something like this would be a good idea in World of Tanks. And it's kind of funny that L should ask this question right now, because news has just come out that World of Tanks developers Wargame are considering changing the way tanks move in World of Tanks. Specifically enabling things like tanks drifting in, exactly the same way tanks move in arcade battles in War Thunder. But more on that later. For now, let's specifically focus on the idea of being able to call in off-map artillery support if you're driving a scout tank in World of Tanks, the same way that you can in War Thunder. The whole issue of the hard life that light tank drivers have in random battles in World of Tanks is something that Wargaming are actually taking very, very seriously. They have stated not that long ago that they are looking into improving the quality of life of light tank drivers, specifically light tanks that get scout matchmaking, and they've already taken some steps in that direction. A patch or two ago, they messed around with the matchmaking that scout tanks get. They no longer get into quite such brutal games. Well, most of them do. The Chaffee still gets into tier 10 matches all the time, but Chaffee drivers, they love it. They relish the challenge. They're a funny breed. Most other scout tanks now generally face the kind of tanks that they can always at least damage from the sides and rear, whereas previously, prior to the matchmaking changes for scout tanks, that wasn't always the case. They're not stopping there, of course. They are tinkering with a whole bunch of other ideas about how to go ahead and improve the quality of life for scout tank drivers, but they're being very close-lipped about the kind of plans that they're thinking of implementing. Beyond the whole matchmaking changes that we've already seen, we don't really know an awful lot else about what they're planning to do to make things more interesting for light tank drivers. But since Wargaming are keeping quiet about the plans that they actually have themselves, let's run this one up the flagpole, see who salutes. How about if light tanks, specifically light tanks with scout matchmaking, in World of Tanks got the ability to call in an off-map artillery support barrage in the same way that you can in War Thunder? Who thinks that would be a good idea? Perhaps equally importantly, however, let's say that we think this is a good idea and we're going to make it happen. It's going to go in the World of Tanks, just for the sake of argument. How would you make it work? How would you put it into the game while at the same time eliminating all potential for abuse? Because let's not forget, there is a lot of argument raging in War Thunder about the abuse of the off-map artillery support ability, and it's not the damage that the off-map artillery support does, it's the fact that when you activate the ability, before you actually call the shot in, you're given a top-down view of the area around you. And what people are doing in War Thunder is that they're activating the ability, but they're not calling in the shot, and they're using the raised viewpoint to see places that they would not be able to see from the turret of their tank. So if you were to introduce something like this into World of Tanks, you would have to first remove the ability to abuse it in the same way that it gets abused in War Thunder. The simplest and easiest way to do it would be to ensure that you can only use the consumable, and it would probably have to be a consumable in the same way that a first aid kit or a repair kit is a consumable in World of Tanks. Say, for example, you're in your bush, your camo net, your binoculars are up, you spot a whole bunch of enemy tanks, and right at the back there's a real dangerous tank destroyer. So you point your gun or your targeting reticle at that tank destroyer, and then you activate your consumable, and an artillery barrage gets called down on his head. You have to have direct line of sight to whichever target you want that artillery barrage to hit. It seems to be the fairest way of doing it, of both implementing it and making it happen. Make it a consumable and make it a direct line of fire ability only. But then of course there's the other thing. The off-map artillery barrages that you can call down in War Thunder are not guaranteed to hit your target. They will hit the target area in a random series of locations. There is absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that the tank that has been targeted is, even if it doesn't move, there's no guarantee that your artillery barrage is actually going to hit anything. And that's fine in War Thunder, because it's an ability with a cooldown that you can use over and over and over again. If I was paying 3,000 credits, or 5,000, or whatever, for an artillery barrage, I damn well want to make sure that if, providing the target I was aiming it at hadn't moved, I would I would feel cheated if I didn't do any damage to him. So again, you still have to think about how you're actually going to implement it into the game. Now, I haven't actually given this much thought. I'm quite literally just coming up with things as I talk about it. And given this little consideration for the implications, I've already come up with ways that you can abuse it. And ways that you could potentially limit the abuse. And this is the kind of thing that you have to take into consideration. It's all well and good coming up with one of these great ideas, and they sound fantastic on paper, but then the more you think about it, the more you think about the actual implications of what it would mean if you take something from one game and slap it into another. And until very, very recently, I would have rejected this idea out of hand. You might think, no, Wargaming are never going to do that. They're never just going to copy something straight from War Thunder. Oh, that's what I would have thought, until very, very recently, when I heard the news about how World of Tanks are thinking about changing the way, as I mentioned earlier on, the way tanks move in World of Tanks. One of the many things that makes War Thunder and World of Tanks two different games is the way that the tanks handle. Tanks in World of Tanks don't actually move very realistically. And I know that War Thunder, particularly in War Thunder arcade battles, War Thunder's received a lot of stick for tanks drifting. Right? People view it as not being particularly realistic. You would be amazed at how unrealistic the tank movement actually is in World of Tanks compared to War Thunder. The gravity that your tanks experience in World of Tanks is actually 1.2 Gs. And the reason that it's 1.2 Gs is because the tanks would fly if it wasn't 1.2 Gs. Believe it or not, real mid-20th century tanks did not scream around the corner of an obstacle at 50 km per hour, then slam to a halt, and within a second have the turret turned around, planted a shot into the side of an enemy tank, and then screamed off again, reaching 50 km per hour in a matter of seconds, while the tank they've just hit is struggling to turn the turret around and return fire. And I don't care. That is what is fun about World of Tanks. The fact that the tanks do not perform realistically. World of Tanks has never been about historical accuracy or realistic movement or realistic performance. It's an arcade tank simulator, and that's why it's fun. Oh sure, the developers, PR people go on about historical accuracy, but they're lying. It's as simple as that. That's a bold claim, Jingles. How can you say that? Well, how many times have they changed the armour of the Tiger II? You know, as just one of countless examples. The Tiger II. Every time they change the armour, it's for historical accuracy reasons. Well, if it wasn't historically accurate the first 6 times you changed the armour profile of Tank X, why should we believe you now? You're changing things for balance reasons, for gameplay reasons, and that's fine. I'm perfectly happy with that. Occasionally, they even admit it. One of the developers recently said that the poor acceleration of the IS-7 was nothing to do with historical reasons and was all down to do with gameplay and balance reasons, and I applaud him for his honesty. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. I like the fact that World of Tanks is an arcade tank simulator. I like the fact that War Thunder, even in arcade mode, is a more realistic tank simulator. I love the fact that the two games are different. And so eventually, via a very circuitous route, which is not unusual for me, we come to the point of the whole argument. Making World of Tanks more like War Thunder, whether that's implementing off-map artillery barrages for light tanks, whether that's making the tanks drift and handle more like they do in War Thunder, which is something that the developers themselves are actually considering doing. I view these kind of things with the deepest of suspicion. I like the fact that these two games are very different. I like the fact that in World of Tanks I can scream around a corner in my T-54, instantly come to a halt, plant a shot into the side of an E-100 and be out of there before he's even turned his turret around. I like that I can do this without having to sit there rocking backwards and forwards on my suspension for 5 seconds, giving the E-100 time to turn his turret around and plant a shot into my side armour. I also like the fact that I can't do this in War Thunder. I like the fact that tanks handle more realistically in War Thunder. I like that I've got a choice between the two games. And so, you know, I'm deeply suspicious when people start talking about changing one of these games to perform more like the other, especially when the developers start talking about it, even though they're never coming out and saying, yeah, we want to make our tanks handle like they do in War Thunder. the end result is the same. You know, if it looks like War Thunder, smells like War Thunder, and tastes like War Thunder, it may as well be War Thunder. And I don't play World of Tanks because I want to play War Thunder. I play War Thunder because I want to play War Thunder. I play World of Tanks because I want to play World of Tanks. And if the two games start looking like each other, well, what's the point? Your mileage may, of course, vary. We're never all going to agree on this subject. So, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Speaking of tank games that aren't World of Tanks and tank games that aren't War Thunder, a lot of you are obviously aware of Obsidian Software's new tank game, Armoured Warfare. Well, I got a message recently from the developers of Armoured Warfare. They're very keen to have me on board for the beta test, which is nice. So, and I know a lot of you were getting very, very excited about a new tank game appearing on the market, you know, and as you should be. We all love our tank games. So it's not 100% confirmed yet, but it's looking very likely that I will be getting into the beta test of Armoured Warfare, and I'm very, very excited about that. I think it's got a lot of potential, and you know, as I said, with games like War Thunder's aerial combat and World of Warplanes, the more competition on the market, the better. The only winners can be us. So very, very excited about the whole idea of getting into the Armoured Warfare beta and bringing you some video footage of that as and when it becomes available. Actually, you know, it was getting this message from the guys at Oblivion that made me realise that I've been doing it wrong all this time. What are you talking about, Jingles? I'll tell you. The message from Oblivion basically said, hi, you know, we're developing this new tank game. You've got a lot of subscribers who are interested in tank warfare. We'd love to get you on board for the beta test. Fantastic. But it wasn't until I got that message that I realised, hang on a minute, why have I been paying for all of my games? I'm at the stage now where developers are actually seeking me out to get me to play their games and put videos up on YouTube. It's taken a long time to get here, but I know for a fact, and I never stopped to consider this until after I got this message from Oblivion, other YouTubers who don't have a tenth the number of subscribers that I have will contact developers and ask for review copies of their games. And I'm not criticising them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I've been so used to paying for everything that I play. It wasn't until I got this message from Oblivion that I realised I've been doing it wrong all this time. I could have been playing everything for free for years, but no. Like you, I've been, well, I hope you've been paying for your games. I might have opened a whole different can of worms there, but yeah, all this time I've been, you know, paying my monthly subscriptions and buying games from Steam and downloading them from publishers' websites, and apparently I should have just been contacting the developers directly and saying, go on, give us a review copy. Well, I know now anyway. Right now all the other YouTubers are going, oh, Jingles, you're such a noob. Well, we're approaching the end of the video, so why don't we try to do something new in this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles? Why don't we try to do something that I have never done before? Let's answer more than 2 questions this week. This question comes from Pokemon Fan. He wants to know, hey Jingles, do you think War Thunder or World of Tanks will ever introduce modern day tanks and aircraft? And the simple answer to that one is no. A slightly more complicated answer is no, and I hope not, and I'll tell you why. It's because things like the introduction of smoothbore guns, and more particularly the kind of ammunition that you can fire from a smoothbore gun, would just break the game. Armour-piercing, fin-stabilised, discarding sabot, depleted uranium penetrators, just no. Armour would become completely irrelevant. Tanks with that kind of gun, we're never going to see in the game. Similarly, things like explosive reactive armour, Chobham armour, things like that, it's totally beyond the scope of what you already have in World of Tanks. In World of Tanks specifically, modern vehicles we're never going to see. There is just too big a capability difference between tanks that have modern Chobham or reactive armour, tanks that have smoothbore guns, and all of those tanks that haven't. The tanks that didn't come equipped with that kind of technology, in order to be even remotely realistic, they would never stand a chance against the kind of tanks that did have that kind of technology. And Wargaming have actually gone on record as saying this themselves. The cut-off point for development of tanks in World of Tanks is with the introduction of smoothbore guns. Up to that point, we're fine. From that point on, you will not see those kind of vehicles in World of Tanks. Now, when it comes to modern aircraft, in War Thunder, it's a similar situation. In War Thunder, the cut-off point is around about the time of the Korean War. Between the Korean War and the Vietnam War, you had some huge advances in aircraft technology, particularly military aircraft technology. Suddenly, aircraft were going supersonic. Remember what it was like when you got your first relatively high-tier prop-driven aircraft in War Thunder, aircraft like the P-51 Mustang or the TA-152, and you first came up against jets on the enemy team, Me-262s or Gloucester Meteors, and they would just use their speed and power advantage to do boom and zoom attacks on you over and over and over. They'd dive on you, they'd fire, they might kill you, they might not, but then they'd zoom away, open the distance out to 4 or 5 kilometers, turn around, gain altitude, and just do it again. You were basically completely at their mercy. Imagine that 10 times worse if you had supersonic aircraft in War Thunder going up against even fast jets like the F-86F Sabre, which is not, well, it's not a supersonic aircraft in War Thunder. F-86Fs were capable of breaking the sound barrier under certain conditions, but not in War Thunder. The advantage would just be too much in the hands of the jets that were capable of supersonic speeds. And that's not all. You've also got beyond visual range combat. Missile technology. Imagine you're flying along, minding your own business, you've just taken off, you're climbing to altitude in your MiG-15 over the Korea map, and then suddenly your jet just explodes. That's because a guy in an F-4 Phantom 20 kilometers away just got a missile lock on you with his Sparrow missiles. The MiG-15 doesn't have a radar warning receiver, so you didn't even see it coming. How much fun would that be? You can never catch him, because he can shoot you out of the sky from the other side of a realistic battle map. He can climb to 60,000 feet, and he can do 2.2 times the speed of sound. You have no chance against an aircraft like that. And so you're never going to see things like that in War Thunder. Apart from anything else, they'd have to start modelling things like radar, because the combat would start occurring beyond visual ranges. And while I'm sure that, Gaijin could do that, that's not what they want to do. It's a completely different kind of game. Once you start getting beyond visual range combat, missile technology, that kind of thing, it just changes the entire nature of the game. And that's not what they're in the business of doing. This is visual range, air-to-air dogfighting combat. That's what War Thunder is. And that's why you're never going to see modern jets, even jets as modern as the Vietnam War era, you're never going to see those in War Thunder. Diabetic Play-Doh has a fiendish question. He wants to know, Jingles, what is it that you do when you're not on the computer or sleeping? Well, I could, make up some shit that would make me sound all windswept and interesting, but I don't think I'd be fooling anybody. I think you all know me too well by now. I don't do anything other than play on the computer or sleep. That's pretty much all I do all day. Well, I eat. There you go. That's what I do. That's what I do when I'm not on the computer or sleeping. I eat. I'm a geek. I'm a computer nerd. Sorry, I'm a gamer. This is what I do. And I think it's probably obvious to everybody, and I wouldn't be fooling anybody if I tried to tell you otherwise. The final question, well, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. It was a very, very funny comment on last week's Mingles with Jingles from Namadim Oakleaf, and it was in response. I mentioned that one of the guys I met when I was out in America, Dale, he's gotten himself a European server World of Tanks account, and he was absolutely stunned at the level of idiocy on display on the EU server in low-level World of Tanks games. In particular, one guy didn't even know how to tell the difference between a friendly team and the enemy team, and he was just shooting up everybody. Well, this struck a chord with Mr. Oakleaf, apparently. He remembers when he first started playing World of Tanks, he didn't know any better. He loaded up his T1 Cunningham, pressed the random battle button, and immediately started shooting the nearest German tanks he could find. He didn't realise until you start getting some very, very angry messages in game chat. I think the dumbest thing I did when I first started playing World of Tanks was artillery. I got my tier 2 Bison and I played it as a tank destroyer because I didn't realise you could zoom in into top-down artillery view, at least until I'd unlocked the Vespa at tier 3. And that is surprisingly common. That happens a lot more often than you'd think. What dumb things have you guys done when you were first playing World of Tanks? What sort of stuff do you look back on now and think, oh my god, how could I have been such a massive noob? There's got to be some funny shit out there. Let me know in the comments. Well, anyway, that's bringing us to the end of this issue of Mingles with Jingles. I've checked, and apparently it's episode 63. Hey. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've been amused by it. As always, let me know what you think about any of the points and comments that I've raised in the comments section of this video, and I will catch you next time.